not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path.
We're here in Beitostøl in Norway at the Norwegian Summer School 2014, learning about the 12 signs of love. The keynote speaker this year is Tom Price, who is the author of a book on this subject and is also a musician. There is a quotation in the Baha'i writings which expresses the theme of this summer school. They whose hearts are warmed by the energizing influence of God's creative love cherish His creatures for His sake and recognize in every human face a sign of His reflected glory. Tom, would you please tell us about your upcoming book and your talks at this summer school?
Yes, the title of the book and the summer school is called The 12 Signs of Love. And really what I wanted to do was define what love actually is in terms of practice. We often talk about love, I love this or I love that, but we don't know what it means. And so I divided love into actions. What can you do to be a loving person? Because sometimes we don't know what love looks like, what it behaves like. And so I divided love into 12 things, and if you can do those things, then you will be a more loving person. So you learn to listen to people, you learn to praise people, you learn to look at the good qualities in people, you learn to try and make people happy, you learn to forgive people when they do things that are not so good to you, and so on. These are the manifestations of love. In other words, love has to have some way of showing itself, and these are the ways you can show love. And in this way we can gradually practice the little things that in total make love. So if you want to be a more loving person to your family, to your mother, your father, your husband, your wife, your workmates, these are things that you can do. Because everyone in the world needs to learn how to love more and more, and this is what the world needs. This is the most important thing everybody needs to learn. So we try to break it down into little manageable actions that each of us can try and do every day. I selected 12 because I like the number 12, and there's 12 months of the year and 12 signs of the zodiac and all kinds of different things. I'm a musician, you know, we have 12 notes that we play. So I thought this was a beautiful way of breaking love down into its small components.
Let your heart burn, let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn, let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path.
You know, the Baha'i faith began with music. Our faith began with music and singing. We know this because when Baha'u'llah was first imprisoned in Tehran in the Siyah, he taught all of the prisoners to sing. So our faith began with singing. And we would like to sing for you the same words that were sung that time. What happened was that Baha'u'llah taught all the prisoners on one side of the prison to chant in Arabic the words, "God is sufficient unto me, He is the all-sufficing." And on the other side of the prison, he asked them to chant back an answer, "In Him let the trusting trust." And they chanted this back and forth all night long. It was so loud that you could hear it coming out of the ground, and the Shah even heard it in his palace. And we know from reading history in the Dawnbreakers that it wasn't only Baha'u'llah's followers who were singing this. Many of those that were singing them were criminals and murderers and thieves and assassins. And this is very similar to the tenors and basses we have up here in the choir tonight. So this will be a very faithful reproduction of that first occasion when the Baha'i faith began. So we'll have the men sing it first in Arabic and the women in Arabic, and then we'll all sing it together in English. It's called God is Sufficient Unto Me. Well, welcome back, friends. And how do you feel about the first 5 signs of love? You all feel you can practice them? So I'm going to move straight on to the 6th sign of love, and this one I believe is the hardest one. Of the other 11 are easy compared to this one. And to describe it to you, I want to tell you a story. Some of you might have heard this story, but I'm going to tell it again anyway. You know that the Bab was executed by the Shah of Iran, the Shah of Persia, the Nasruddin Shah. And he was also responsible for the execution of more than 20,000 Babis. Our faith was born in a bloodbath of cruelty and persecution and massacre. And they say that the Shah of Iran, the Nasruddin Shah, was equaled in his cruelty perhaps only by his son. his son, the prince, who was named Zilla Sultan, which means son of the Shah. Zilla Sultan was the eldest son of Nasruddin Shah. And he was also responsible for the execution of a great many Babis. In fact, you may have heard of the King of Martyrs and the Beloved of Martyrs, two of the most beloved of all the early Babis. They were actually executed by Zilla Sultan, the son of the Shah. And it's interesting because Abdul-Baha was imprisoned his whole life. From the age of 8 until his late 60s, he was a prisoner because of this family, the Shah and his son. He witnessed all kinds of horrendous things, and the death of his followers, and his father, bent over and, because of the Sia Shal, and the death of his own brother before his eyes, and all kinds of things because of the cruelty of this Shah and his son. And it so happened that when Abdul-Baha was finally freed from prison, after a lifetime of being a prisoner, he took a year to regain his health in Egypt, and then he got on a ship and sailed for the first time in his life as a free man to the west, and he arrived in Marseille in the south of France, took a train up to Geneva, and then went across from Geneva to a city just across the border called Tonalebe, which is just about 20 miles or so from Geneva. And he said that that was the first time in his life that he had experienced peace. The first time, because you can imagine this. The interesting thing is this is the first stop on Abdul-Baha's travels to the west, the first place he stopped in, and it so happened that the son of the Shah, Zilla Sultan, the prince who was responsible for the murder of all these Babis, was in Geneva at that very time. And you think, what are the odds that Abdul-Baha would be a prisoner his whole life and finally get free and go, and he goes to a city in Geneva on the other side of the planet, and here this prince would be there in Geneva, about 20 kilometers away, Geneva and Tonalebe. But what is even more odd is that on the day Abdul-Baha was there in Tonalebe, he had traveled across and the prince was actually in Tonalebe. Do you think that's a remarkable thing in history for that to happen out of the whole world, that this would happen? And there was a Baha'i there, and he was named Hippolyte Dreyfus. You've read his accounts. He was there at the time, and he witnessed this whole scene that happened. He was on the street, and he says the master was on the terrace, and he was standing in the doorway, and he saw Zilla Sultan, the prince, coming up the steps, and the prince looked at him with a startled look. Now, I imagine this would be quite interesting because he was Persian, and they were in France in 1912. So someone wearing Persian clothes in France would have been quite startling to this prince. So he immediately asked Hippolyte Dreyfus, he said, "Who is that Persian nobleman?" And Hippolyte said, "That is Abdul-Baha." And he nodded his head. He knew exactly who that was. Okay. So he said, "Can I speak to him?" So Hippolyte Dreyfus then recounts, and he writes this in a letter to Juliet Thompson. He says, "If you could have seen the brute, Juliet, mumbling out his miserable excuses." Okay? And I'm thinking as I'm reading this, what is Abdul-Baha going to do? This man who was responsible for the murder of hundreds and hundreds of Babis, who was responsible, he and his father, for putting his father in the Sia Shah. And at the age of 8, he had to see his father bent over with 100-pound chains because of this man. And he had to be exiled. And he had to see his own brother die in front of his own eyes and beg his father to plead. And all of his life imprisonment until he was a bent old man of 60 was because of this man and his father. And Abdul-Baha then sees him finally he gets free, and first day and he's experiencing peace, and this man comes in and he's making miserable excuses. And so I'm thinking, what is Abdul-Baha going to say? And Hippolyte Dreyfus continues. He says, "The master took him in his arms and said, 'All those things are in the past. Never think of them again. Then he invited Zillah Sultan's 2 sons to spend the day with him. You see, Abdul-Baha's forgiveness had no bounds. Has anyone done anything to you as bad as what he did to Abdul-Baha? Has anyone murdered hundreds and hundreds of your friends and followers? Has anyone imprisoned you for your entire life? And yet Abdul-Baha hugged him and said, those things are in the past, never even think about them. And you see, this was Abdul-Baha's quality of forgiveness. It knew no bounds. And there's no one that any of us can imagine in our lives that has done as much to us as he has done, as the Shah and the son of the Shah did. And I think this is a remarkable coincidence in history. I think for 1,000 years, this encounter will be known, that Abdul-Baha came in contact with the son of the Shah of Iran, and he immediately embraced him and said, never think of those things. This is a story that will not be forgotten for 1,000 years, and I don't think it was an accident that it happened, because it makes us focus on this essential quality of love, which is forgiveness. Forgiveness is perhaps the most important quality of love, because unless you can learn to forgive, you really cannot learn to love. It's a very hard virtue to attain, and many times we hold on to not forgiving someone, sometimes for our whole life. Sometimes we even have people that we don't forgive and we don't even remember what it was they did. You know, sometimes we say, I don't even know what you did anymore, but I still know I hate you. Isn't that right? I know in my family, when I was growing up, my great uncle, who was like, you know, the patriarch of the whole family, he was never speaking to my cousin, or one of my cousins I had, or maybe one of my uncle's cousins. And he never spoke to him, and I knew as a little boy, we all knew that these two never talked. So, you know, every now and then we'd talk about, well, why are these two not talking? And everyone said, we don't know. We can't remember. All we know is that something happened way back in the past and they still aren't talking until the day they died. That was happened. And so we find this very hard. We cling to not forgiving someone so long and so hard that it becomes calcified. It becomes like a fossil that we just hang on to and we won't let go. And we have to learn that forgiveness is the essential thing we have to learn to do in life. We are put on this world largely to learn how to forgive other people, because we have to. Now, we have to first tell ourselves that granting someone forgiveness is not letting them off the hook. Granting forgiveness is freeing yourself. Forgiveness has really nothing much to do with the other person. It has to do with yourself. Because when you withhold forgiveness, it always means that you are attached to something. You are attached to some part of yourself. They did something that hurt some part of you that you're attached to. Perhaps they hurt your pride. Perhaps they hurt your status. Perhaps they hurt your power. Perhaps they insulted you. They hurt your feelings about how you look. Or they took money from you. They stole from you. Maybe they even did a physical thing to you. But in any shape or form, when you don't forgive someone, it means that you are attached to something and they hurt that. And now, because of that attachment, you won't forgive the person. And this means that when you don't forgive someone, it really is in reality helping you, because it's teaching you of your unneeded attachments. It's pointing a finger to what you are attached to. And you need to forgive them in order to lose that attachment. There's a story, I don't know if it's true, but it's a legend that many people have recounted about the sculptor Michelangelo. Michelangelo made this perfect sculpture of David, you know, and it was said to be perfection. Even today, it's still considered perfect in every way. And so they asked Michelangelo, how did you do it? And he said it was very easy. He said, I just took a big piece of marble and I cut away everything that wasn't David. He said, I just cut away everything that wasn't David. He just cut it all away. And that's really what God is doing to us. He's cutting away, chisel by chisel, every part of us that is not His perfect image. not the perfect image of God, the perfect statue. And this is what people do to us. They are the ones that are the cuts. Every time they do something that injures us and we forgive them, we then lose a little bit of ourself and gradually we become a more perfect image of God. It's a hard virtue to attain, but because it requires you to let go of yourself. We cling to self. But you can only truly be free when you can learn to be forgiving of all people. Now, we know that God is forgiving, isn't that right? Do we all say God is forgiving? Do you believe God is forgiving? But we don't want to be forgiving. So if you want to be like God, you have to be forgiving. That makes you more godlike. Forgiveness is the highest form of love. It's the highest form of love because we show love to someone that did something bad and wrong to us. You see, it's easy to love the lovable. But when somebody messes up, when somebody does something bad to you, when somebody hurts you and you love them, that is the highest form of love. It's the real proof that you love a person. Let's analyze the story of Abdul-Baha to see what true forgiveness is. First of all, Zillah Satan did something wrong. Would you agree that murdering, hundreds of Babis is a wrong thing? Would you agree? Okay. So, you don't just forgive people that are nice or kind of good. You forgive the bad people. And they definitely did something wrong. This is the important thing. You don't just say, well, I'll forgive that person or that person, but I won't forgive him. The Zillah Sultan did a wrong thing. That's the first thing we have to understand. Secondly, he did not apologize. He didn't apologize. Is that right? He didn't apologize. Sometimes we'll say, well, if the person will apologize, then I'll forgive them. Okay, so in other words, we say forgiveness is conditional upon apology. We feel that. If they just apologize, then I'll forgive. But he did not do that. Thirdly, and this is very important, Abdul-Baha did not want to tell him all the bad things he did so he could understand. Sometimes we say, well, I'll forgive the person, but first they have to hear me out and they have to listen to how I was hurt and I have to tell them all that, then I'll forgive them. Abdul-Baha did exactly the opposite. He told him never to think about it. You see? Because Abdul-Baha didn't hold on to it. Those things are all part of true forgiveness. But the last one is even harder. Abdul-Baha then said, spend the day with me and your sons. Spend time with him. That to me seems even harder. Like I can imagine, I can go to someone and I say, well, okay, I forgive you. Now get out of my face, get away from me. But to actually forgive them and then want to spend time with them. Do you think that's amazing? This is Abdul-Baha's quality. The real proof of love is that you love those who hurt you. That's the real proof. Who do us wrong, who show their faults, and we overlook them. What deal is it? What big thing is it that you can forgive someone who's nice, or that you love someone who's nice? It's proof of love. Martin Luther King, the great civil rights worker in the United States, he said this. He said, he who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. And this is interesting, coming from someone who comes from a background of persecution for hundreds of years, of slavery and prejudice in the United States, he still understood that the doorway to love goes through forgiveness. Forgiveness is really the door to love. Now, this is very interesting teaching because most people, when I speak about forgiveness, they say it's hard to do. They say it's difficult, that I cannot do that. Sometimes I will speak on forgiveness at a conference and people will come up to me afterwards and they'll say, I understand Abdul-Baha, he could forgive, and I understand forgiveness in general, but for me, there's this one person that I can never forgive, and I will not forgive that person. They say this. And sometimes they'll tell me who the person is, or they'll tell me what the person did. And sometimes even I get so angry because they tell me horrible stories. I mean, I've heard some horrendous things that have happened, because in the world there's all kinds of things happening. And I don't know what to say to these people sometimes. I don't know what to say because I know this is the teaching, and yet at the same time I know how these people, their whole lives have been ruined. In some cases their lives are ruined, and every single day they know that this person did, for various reasons I don't want to go into it, that every single minute they wake up, the thing that this person did to them is pressing on their lives, and they don't forgive. And for a while I thought that some people just don't have the ability to forgive. And then I learned an interesting thing. It was when I was in Los Angeles, we used to have classes once a week on the teachings of Abdul-Baha and spirituality and love. And one week we had a class on forgiveness. And so we talked about forgiveness for the whole night, and then we had a homework assignment where everybody had to go home and they had to write down the name of at least one person who they have not forgiven. One person they haven't forgiven. They said, think about it and see if you can think of one person that you have not forgiven and write their name down. I said, if you couldn't think of anybody, then write my name down. I told them to do that, but they all seemed to have somebody. And then I said, I want you, just in your imagination, speak forgiveness to them. You know, don't really do it. You know, just in your imagination, speak forgiveness to them. Completely let go and speak them. Perhaps the person isn't even around, or maybe they're not even alive. But whatever it is, just speak forgiveness to them and practice forgiveness at home, doing this. And come back next week and tell us, you know, how you felt. So we came back next week, and everybody told their stories. And everybody said it was very liberating. It was a great feeling to do this. And one man said, he says, I actually did it, but then the next day I saw the man that I had done to, and I did it for real. I actually said it to him for real. And I said, that wasn't the exercise. You weren't supposed to do that. I just wanted you to practice it. He says, well, you know, I don't know what overcame me, but after doing it the night before, I did it. So I said, well, tell us what happened. He said, well, it's been 17 years. And this man at work and me, we've been totally enemies for 17 years. We never speak to each other. We hate each other. If we walk down the hallway and we look to the side, we don't make any eye contact. It's been like this for 17 years at work, me and this other man. And the night before, I practiced what you said, and I said it to him. So then I saw him at work, and something overcame me, and I went ahead and said it to him. I said, I want to speak to you, and he came. And we said, what happened? He said, well, as I spoke, he crossed his arms like this, and he looked straight down. He wouldn't look at me in the face. He looked down, and I spoke, and I spoke. And he says, when I finished speaking, when I totally said all the things, he still kept his head down for a second. And there was silence. And he said he kept his head down, and then suddenly he looked up at me and he smiled. And he said, okay, just like that. And he said it was like 17 years of weight just came off of his head. And everybody in the room that was listening was crying, because they couldn't believe this. And he said, I never knew I had the ability to do that. He said, I didn't realize I had that power. But by doing the exercise the night before, I did it by practice, and then I did it. And maybe I would have gone my whole life clinging to that, but just realize sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for our ability to love. In other words, we're given these teachings, and we say, I can't do them, because we're so closed-minded. Maybe we should be more open-minded and give ourselves credit that we can do it. And I tell you right now that this is the surest way that you can free yourself and you can learn to love, is to pick somebody in your life who you have not forgiven, who you're holding ill feelings towards, people who you're ignoring or not seeing or not being friendly to, or you really hate, or you have a real fight with them, and maybe they have one with you as well. And try to forgive them. Try to forgive them. First, try it imaginarily, just in your imagination, and then maybe you can do it for real. Even if they are no longer alive, you need to forgive them. Because until you let go and completely wash from the tablet of your heart what they have done, you will always be a prisoner to that. Let me read you a passage from Baha'u'llah on this subject. Baha'u'llah, and this is from a newly translated passage. Let me give it to you. This is from a newly translated passage. It was translated by Ali Nakhjavani and spoken at a recent conference, but it's from Baha'u'llah. It says, O ye my people, conceal and forgive the faults of others, wherever they may be, so that God may forgive your own faults through his grace and mercy. Then wash away such faults from your heart, so that God may wipe away your own shortcomings and clothe you in his beauteous robe. Now there's many interesting things in this. First of all, he says, conceal and forgive the faults of others wherever they may be. So you have to forgive, so that God will forgive you. In other words, you do that so God will forgive you. Then he says, wash away them from the tablet of your heart. It's a very important thing, that it's not good enough just to forgive someone, say, okay, I forgive you. You also have to wash it out of your heart, whatever they did. Because when someone does a bad thing to you, if you keep thinking about it, they did the bad thing to you more than once. In fact, psychology has found that to vividly imagine something is 90% the same as it actually happening. Because the human imagination is very powerful. So if you imagine something very strongly, it's 90% the same as it actually happening. So what happens is somebody does a bad thing to you, and then you hurt. The next day, you vividly imagine it and think about it. So now they did it to you twice. And then you think about it again the next day. And if you think about it every day for a year, how many times did they do it to you? 365 times. And what makes it worse is every time you replay it in your mind, you add a little more to the story. You make it worse, because that's what human beings do. I know I sometimes hear somebody tell a story of something, and I was there, and a year later they tell the story, and they've added some things to the story, and a year later they add a thing, and I was actually there, I remember. Yeah, but this is what we do. So what happens is that somebody did one bad thing to you, and you made it 100 or 1,000 bad things, because you dwelt upon it. So until you wash it away from the tablet of your heart, you're not free. And that's really what Abdul-Baha was doing. Do you think that Abdul-Baha could have clung to the fact that he was a prisoner from the age of 8 till his late 60s? And that his father was in prison and that people were killed? He could have clung to that. Don't you think so? He could have been bitter? But he knew that he had to be free from that. And he said to the Zillah Sultan, never think of those things. They're in the past. This is the essential quality of forgiveness, that you not only forgive the other person, but you wash it away from the tablet of your heart. Sometimes forgiving someone doesn't mean that you go up to them and say, I forgive you. Be careful of doing that, because in some cases, they don't want to hear that. Do you understand? Because maybe they don't even think they did anything wrong. You understand? So if I went up to you and said, I forgive you, you say, what are you talking about? I don't need to be forgiven. So you don't have to necessarily go up and say, I forgive you. You have to behave towards them in a way. See, Abdul-Baha didn't actually say, I forgive you. He just hugged him, and he said, and he showed him love and attention, and you need to do this. Excuse me, I have to go back to my, okay. So this is a very important law, a very important teaching, and yet whenever I go anywhere in the Baha'i world and speak about this, somebody comes up to me and says they can't do it, or they say it's hard. How many of you right now can think of someone who you have not forgiven right now for something they've done to you? Okay, that's good. I think, how many of you think somebody may do something to you in the future that will be bad? How many of you have husbands that are going to do something bad to you in the future? How many of you have wives that are going to do something bad? How many of you have children? The point of the matter is that sooner or later, everybody, no, who's perfect? How many of you women are married to Abdul-Baha? Okay, so just here's a news flash. I just turn on the news, flash news. You're not perfect. Okay? I just hate to break the news. And here's another news flash. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect. Therefore, sooner or later, you're going to have to forgive people. You're going to have to, because they're not going to do everything perfect towards you. So you have to learn to do this. So how many of you that raised your hand just a minute ago that there's someone that you haven't forgiven feel that you could forgive them? Oh, that's great. You feel you could do it. Well, try it. Try it just in your imagination. Now let me read you an interesting statement. First of all, how many of you are aware of Christianity or come from a Christian background? In this country, yes, a lot of people come from a Christian. But it so happens that Jesus only revealed one prayer that we have written down in the New Testament. It's called the Lord's Prayer. And in that prayer, it says, or you say to God in the prayer, "O God, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." Or it might say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Now the actual meaning of that, if you look at it, you're saying to God, "God, to the same degree that we forgive others, you forgive us." Okay? That's really what you're saying. As we forgive others, you forgive us. So, if you go to the next world and you didn't forgive people, and then God doesn't forgive you, and you say, "God, I thought you were forgiving." He says, "Yes, but you told me to forgive you only to the extent that you forgave other people." That's the way the prayer is written. You say, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's what I said in the prayer." Now the interesting thing is, I mentioned this at a gathering of Christians, and several people said, "You know, I've been saying that prayer my whole life, and I never thought of it that way." They said, "I never thought of it that way, that we're actually telling God to forgive us to the extent that we forgive other people." But that's the way. And I said, "Well, why don't we look at the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament and see exactly what it says, and go back," it's in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, "and see what are the very next words after the Lord's Prayer." After it says Amen, what is the very next thing after the Lord's Prayer? And I'll read you what Jesus said. Immediately after the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said, "For if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." Is that clear enough? Is that clear enough? How many of you would like God to forgive all your trespasses? Who wants? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. You want God to forgive your trespasses. You want that? There's an easy way to do it. Easy way to do it. Sure way to do it. All you got to do is forgive everybody their trespasses. It's a good deal, wouldn't you think? Because, my God, all you got to do is forgive them, and then you get all yours. And think of all your sins that you want forgiven. So I think it's a really good deal that Jesus is giving us. He says, if you forgive everyone else their trespasses, God will forgive yours. Now, how many of you would prefer God to not forgive them? And would prefer God not to forgive them? In other words, how many of you would like it if God doesn't forgive you? Who really doesn't want God to not forgive them? Would you like that? Okay, if you want God not to forgive you, there's an easy way to do it. If you want God to not forgive you, there's an easy way, a guaranteed way. All you got to do is go out and not forgive those people you raised your hand about now. Just don't forgive them, and now God won't forgive you. Do you like that? It's just like a law. You forgive them, he'll forgive you. You don't forgive them, he won't forgive you. It's almost as if, now is God being spiteful, like, nah, you didn't forgive or something? I don't know. It's some kind of law of forgiveness, that if you want to do it, you'll do it. Now, the interesting thing is, later on in the same book of Matthew, it's chapter 18 now, just a little further ahead, Peter came up to Jesus, and Peter said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Till 7 times?" So he says, how often does he sin against me and I forgive him? 7 times. And it says, Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. 70 times 7, which is how much? 490. So 490 times. So I suppose if they sin against you 491 times, then maybe you can not forgive them. But I don't know. I'm not sure. But that's a very interesting thing. It doesn't matter if they do it once, they do it twice, they do it 3 times, 4 times. This is a very strong teaching in Christianity, isn't it? Forgiveness. Now, Jesus then continued. And it's all in chapter 18 if you want to look it up. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king. And then he tells a story about this king. And he tells the story of the king, and he says that this is what heaven is like. And basically, I won't read it exactly, but the story is this, that there was a man who owed the king a lot of money. It says 1,000 talents, or 10,000 talents. He owed the king. And he didn't pay the king back, and he couldn't pay the king back. So the king ordered that he had to be put into slavery, and that his wife and children had to be put into slavery, because that was the law, if he can't pay the king back. So the man went to the king, and he bowed down, and he prayed to him, and he said, "Please have patience, and I will gradually pay you back." And the king looked at him and had compassion on him and gave him mercy and said, "Okay, yeah, I'll let you pay me back slowly." So this man goes out into the world and he lives his life. And it so happens that as he's working, somebody owes him some money. Somebody owes this man some money. And so he tells the man, he says, "You need to pay me." And the man comes to him and says, "Please, I beg your forgiveness, can let me pay it back." And he says, "No." He says, "I demand that you pay me." And because you can't pay me, he ordered that he go to prison. And this other man went to prison. So some of the people saw that this was the case, and they went and told the king. And the king called him back in, and he said, "O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desired me. Shouldst thou not also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee?" And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him unto his tormentors, till he paid all the debt that was due him. And Jesus began this story by saying that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like this thing. And he finishes the story. He says, "So likewise, he's going to not forgive you if you don't forgive everyone their trespasses." So forgiveness is a very important quality, isn't it? It's the only way you're going to be forgiven by God. And it's the surest way that you will become like God, because you will find God dwelling within you when you forgive someone. Because remember, Abdul-Baha has said, to become close to God, you have to become like God. You have to be like Him. And when you act like God, then you are close to God because you find Him in your heart. He's descended into your heart, according to Abdul-Baha. And if we forgive somebody, then we are like God. Sometimes we think that granting forgiveness is a sign of weakness. Isn't that right? We think, I'm not going to forgive because I'll be weak. They'll view me as weak. I'm giving up. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. So, how can you practice forgiveness? How can you do this? This is a hard virtue. Well, the first thing you have to do is make a list of those people you don't forgive. You need to bring yourself to account in this regard. When Baha'u'llah says, bring thyself to account each day, this is something you need to do. You need to make a list. Now, I don't know how many people are going to be on your list, but some people you may have you've drifted away from them and you didn't forgive them, but you don't see them anymore. Some people you may have to see every day. They might be in your family, they might be in your Baha'i community, they might be at your work, they might be at your school, and so on. But you need to make a list of people. You need to forgive every one of them, those that you are seeing now in your life and those that you are not. The ones that you are not seeing now, maybe someone has passed away or in the past, you still need to forgive them in your mind and wash it out from the tablet of your heart. You need to say that that person is on their pathway to God, and it didn't hurt me, it doesn't bother me, I let go of it, it was only my attachment to pride or whatever. And those that are in your present life, you need to show by your actions that you forgive them. You need to show by your actions. For example, when you see them, look at them in the face and smile and greet them. So often someone we don't forgive, we ignore them. You know, ignoring someone is a great tool of cruelty. You don't actually yell at them, you don't scream them, you don't take a gun and shoot them or anything. You don't do anything outwardly to be cruel, but you use ignoring them and not giving them any attention. You go into a meeting, you say hello, 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 and then you don't say hello to that person. You know people that do that? You have to go out of your way to say hello to them, to greet them, and then to do the other signs of love that we have to that person. You go out of your way to show them. You may not say, I forgive you. And whatever you do, do not mention the thing that was in the past. Don't go to them and say, what we did in the past when we fought and argued and so on. I'm sorry, I forgive you. It was only that you were such an idiot. Or sooner or later you're going to say the wrong thing. Do not think that forgiveness means that you have to completely regurgitate the whole thing and have it out, and then you'll be forgiving. This is some old world notion that forgiveness means that first I have to tell them all the bad things they did to me. No, just immediately show the 12 signs of love to that person, and they will get the idea that you are not attached to that. Whatever it is they did, if they feel they did it, it doesn't hurt you. And probably they don't feel they did it anyway, because a lot of people don't realize. And in this way, you can practice forgiveness. There are plenty of people that you need to forgive. If there wouldn't be this teaching that we need to forgive, there are plenty of teachers that we need to forgive. But whatever pain they have done to you, the only way you're going to cure that pain is by letting go of it. It's kind of ironic in a way, because we think we need to think about pain, and we're told, no, we need to put it away. So this is the essential sign of love. I think really, in a way, it's the hardest, but it is the surest way to arrive at love, to forgive everyone. And you may have had people that have done very bad things. You may have divorced someone and your spouse you don't forgive. You may have had someone who has abused you, either physically or emotionally or some kind of way. You may have had someone who has stolen from you. You may have done something that has lied about you. You may have done something that, in other words, they've done some very bad things. And Abdul-Baha said something interesting. He said, whenever someone does a bad thing to you, make sure you don't do the same thing back to them. Whatever it is, there's many, many passages, and I'm going to read some of these later. He says, whenever someone does anything to you that's bad, try not to do the same thing bad back to them, because that's a natural, instinctive reaction. If somebody yells at you, that's when you're most likely to yell back at someone. If somebody criticizes you, your first thing is to say, oh yeah, but you. Isn't that right? If I say, your fault is this, you say, what are you talking about me? You. In other words, that's your first reaction, is always, if they say something bad about you, to immediately point out something bad about them. Be very careful to do that. If somebody ever tells you one of your faults, immediately you're going to see their faults and think of them. Isn't that right? And then you're going to want to say it, because you feel that's a good argument against them. Like if I say, Korosh, you're blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Korosh say, what about you? Okay? And so, does it really help? First of all, do you want anybody to mention your faults? You don't. Okay, the easiest way to get people to mention your faults is to mention their faults. That's the way. It's going to happen. You have to tell yourself, every time I punch somebody, they're going to punch me back. Okay? we just got to say that. And there's, some people that we learn this very early in life. We learn that you don't punch people because they punch back. But this is the important thing, that we have to learn, that we do not mention to people what they did wrong. So when you want to forgive them, do not tell them, you did this, you did that, but it's okay, I'm bigger than you, I'm so forgiving and stuff like that. No, you're not forgiving if you even tell them what they did. And in this way, you are practicing the essential sign of love. And I hope that every one of you makes it a goal after this session to, at some stage in future, practice forgiveness. And the easiest way to practice forgiveness is to take that person and do the other 11 signs of love. Listen to them, show them attention, look at their good qualities. All the things we do, that is the way to practice forgiveness. So it's easy to practice forgiveness. It takes selecting somebody and going out of your way. After a while, you will find that nobody can hurt you. Nobody can hurt you at all. Because really, nobody can hurt you, only you can hurt yourself. Nobody can actually hurt you, only you hurt yourself. We were just talking about this in the break, that when somebody says something and it hurts you, who really hurt you? Who really hurt you? Did they hurt you? No. It was your attachment to yourself. If you decided that nobody is going to offend me, that I'm never going to be offended by anybody, then nobody has that power. You've taken that power away from them. and you no longer hurt yourself. So withholding forgiveness means freeing yourself. So that is the 6th sign of love, and I think we may have time to do the 7th. Don't you think so? I may not finish the 7th sign of love, but it doesn't really matter. Yes?
What about forgiving oneself? Because with Baha'u'llah says, if you want to find fault with others, think about your own faults.
Yes, yes.
Does this mean that one should concentrate on one's own faults, or should forget it from the tablet of one's heart also?
I think the only time you should dwell on your own faults is when you're thinking of the faults of others. In other words, that's a very specific, that's like medicine that the doctor says. When you see the faults of others, then think of your own faults. But I don't think you should dwell on your own faults as a regular habit. You know, there's certain things that are medicine that you take when you're ill, but you don't take it all the time. Is that right? A doctor will tell you. I think that that was medicine when he said that. It was medicine to say that if you see the faults of others, think of your own faults in as much as you know. But to every day get up and beat yourself over your faults is also not going to help you to grow and develop. Rather, you should think about the good qualities that you have or that you potentially have and try and develop them. There actually are some people that don't forgive themselves. Isn't that right? They don't forgive themselves. And they blame their whole life on what they did in the past. In other words, they're hanging on to something they did in the past, and now it's affecting their present. In other words, they can't get on with life because they're so blaming themselves for the past. And we need to let go of the past. You know, there's an old saying. It says the best thing about the past is that it's over. It's over. And there's another basic concept, and that is that you cannot change the past. Can you change the past? No, you can't. But you can change the present and the future. So why would we allow something that we cannot change affect something that we can change? It makes no sense. So if you dwell on your faults and say, I did this or I did that, and now my whole life is ruined, you are not forgiving yourself. And I think you need to wash that away from the top of your heart. Just get up tomorrow or get up today and try and be as good a person as you can today. Forget about how bad you were in the past. Don't hang on to it in the same way that Abdul-Baha said to Zillah-san, don't even think about those things. In fact, Baha'u'llah said everyone. Mirza Yahya was the archbreaker of the covenant, the antichrist of the Baha'i revelation. Who could have done anything worse than him? He poisoned Baha'u'llah, you know, and so on. And Baha'u'llah said God will forgive him too if he just repents. So you cannot beat yourself up. God will forgive you. You don't have to worry about anything that you did wrong. And besides, most of us did some pretty stupid, horrible, rotten, terrible things in our life. Has anyone not done a horrible, rotten, stupid, terrible thing that you're ashamed of? Give it to God. Give it to God. Say, God, forgive me. And by the way, God, I'm going to forgive everybody else. And then you have to forgive me because that's what you promised. So that's what I think. Does that answer your question? Yes, go ahead.
Just a very small comment. Most people know Kehan here. He has this inner peace therapy, and one of the essential things in forgiveness there that we learn is that when you don't forgive someone, it doesn't really make a difference for the person whether you forgive them or not. But when you don't forgive, you're actually not forgiving a part of yourself.
Yes.
So it is only that image in yourself that you have of that person you're not forgiving. It's like being in a civil war.
Yes.
So when you realize that you're actually harming yourself by not forgiving.
Yes.
While the other person, you might even be happy by you not forgiving because you're
Yeah.
harming yourself. Then it gets easier to forgive.
Yes. I think that we should be very grateful for the fact that we are withholding forgiveness because it is the best way to diagnose our own spiritual condition. Because if you meditate on why you cannot forgive a person, it causes you to think very carefully, well, what is it that I'm attached to that causes me to not forgive that person? What did they do? Did they insult me and hurt my pride? So then I have to think, oh, I've still got a bit of pride. Or if they took something from you. In other words, the act of having to forgive someone is the act of self-reflection. Don't think about them. Don't think about them. Think about yourself and why it is you don't forgive them, and you always arrive at a better place. You always find self-improvement. This is why I say that forgiveness is like chiseling the rock until you become a perfect sculpture. So I completely agree with what you say. Are there some other comments here? Instead of going on to the next sign of love, if there's other questions or comments, somebody that feels forgiveness is very hard to do, you want to tell me, maybe you can tell us that now, or someone that has any other comments on forgiveness. Yes, go ahead.
I missed the point that you need God's help to forgive, because when I am forgiven, or I can forgive, but I realized nothing happened except that I prayed to God to help me to do that. Was very interesting, really.
Okay. Explain to me what you mean. You say you need God's help or you don't need God's help?
I need.
You need God's help.
It didn't leave me the hate for that person or the negative emotion.
That's true.
I prayed God to help me.
That's true. And you know, God is in everybody, and God created everybody. So who are we to not forgive somebody that God created? In fact, we have to stop questioning. Here's one thing. We have to stop questioning who Baha'u'llah picks to play on his team. You understand what I mean by that? We have to stop questioning who Baha'u'llah picks to play on his team. We're Baha'is, and yet sometimes I go throughout the world, and people sit down and they take me privately, and they tell me the whole problem in their community is because of certain Baha'is. They say, this Baha'i is doing this, and that's our problem. Or this National Assembly, that's the problem. Or this local assembly. Or this auxiliary board member. Or this counselor even. I've heard them all. That everybody is questioning who Baha'u'llah picks to play on his team. And the point is that I didn't pick them to play on the team, but I was asked to play with them on the team. And we need to stop questioning Baha'u'llah. Once we do that, we should also stop questioning who God places in front of us in our lives. In whatever circumstance, however we meet them. In fact, Abdul-Baha said that everybody that comes in your presence, God has placed them in your care. We'll read that statement when it comes up. Every single person you meet, God placed that person in your care. And he says you need to be faithful to his trust. So it's very true that we need to look at every person and say, we have to look after them because God has asked us to look after them. And if we do that, we will have the love of God towards them, and we will be able to forgive them. So I agree with you. And in fact, all of this 12 qualities, you cannot learn unless you have a relationship with God, and then you apply that. So I agree with you. Yes, back here.
There is the station of justice.
The station of justice, yes. We were just talking about this in the break. And there's a passage that you can read, Abdul-Baha. It's in Some Answered Questions, and it's called The Proper Treatment of Criminals. I don't know if you've read that, but it's a very important passage because Abdul-Baha explains that there's a certain form of justice that must be practiced by the community. He says the community or the government or, and so on. In other words, there's a form of justice, and he says that this must happen in the world. It must happen in the world because to show mercy to the wolf will be cruel to the sheep or whatever. Do you understand the principle? And it must be practiced in a way that protects society and protects the world. And this must occur. And then he points out that there is one way in which the community acts and one way in which individuals act on a one-on-one basis. The individuals, they're over here, okay. The individuals always act with love in their one-on-one relationship. And the community has to act with justice. And they have to administer justice, and criminals and people that do bad things, they have to be punished. There has to be protection from the rest of the people. And these are the two things that support society. And we need them both. We need them both. But Abdul-Baha says that the individual shouldn't want to do this, and the institution should be not doing this. In fact, Shoghi Effendi one time said, sometimes we expect the institutions to act with love, and the individuals try to administer justice. And he says it should be the other way around. So, in your personal relations, you act with absolute love and forgiveness, even to everyone. But if they're doing anything that is harming the community, is dangerous, is criminal, then you need to rely upon the community. And if these two things both do their job, we have a wonderful world. Because justice administered by the community is an act of love. It's an act of greater love for the whole community. But justice administered by the individual, Abdul-Baha says, is vengeance. And it doesn't work, and it doesn't create anything. And Abdul-Baha said that when you take vengeance on someone, in other words, if you do to someone what they did to you, you both did a wrong thing, just one did it before the other. But they're both wrong. Therefore, he says it must be the community. So this is a complex subject in which we understand that the world is supported by two pillars. The pillar of justice on this side by the community, and the pillar of love by the individual. My entire talk is based on this side. If I could include this, it would be wonderful, but then the talk would have to be, twice as long, and maybe we should talk about that too. But this is why Baha'is are trying to build a system, a world order that has justice built within communities, and why we believe in a world police force and world government and in all those things, because they are just as essential. But they will not work if there's not love on this side, and love needs to be balanced on this side. So that's a very short answer, but go back and read that passage and some answer questions about the treatment of criminals, and he'll tell it much better than me. Yes, go ahead.
I also said that communities should be built on justice, not on forgiveness.
Yes?
But also in different words, he said that unjust is unforgivable sin.
I can't hear exactly. Can someone repeat what he said?
Unjust is unforgivable sin.
Oh, unjust is unforgivable? Yes, and so what do you mean? What? Yes, so what is the point that you mean by that? Yes. Yeah. I think that when we use the word justice in English language, we need to understand that in Arabic, there are two words for justice. But English doesn't have that distinction. One of the words of justice is a kind of justice that I was just talking about, which has to do with governments and institutions and punishment and so on. There's another form of, and I can't remember the name, but some Arab can tell you, is it? Insal and Adl. Okay. So the other form of justice has more to do with the individual. And that form of justice is defined more as having an open mind, as having a fair mind, and seeing things through your own eyes and not through the eyes of others, as he defines it in the second hidden word. It's that one. You see, so when we say justice, sometimes we take a quotation that refers to this kind of justice and we impose the interpretation of the other. In fact, you are being just when you show love and forgiveness to all people and have an open mindedness. And there's another form of justice over here. And I think maybe these two words in Arabic mirror the two forms of practice in the world. Abdul-Baha even said he would never defend himself against other people. If someone attacked him, he said he would not hurt him. But he said if someone attacked someone next to him, and he said if he pointed to someone, he said then I would defend him. In other words, we have different attitude in our personal relations as we do for protecting the community. This is such a complicated subject that I'm afraid to go into it because it's fascinating, and it'll take us away from what we need to do as individuals. So my suggestion to you is that if you feel that somebody is doing something that is in this other realm, then you need to take it to an institution, to a government, to a Baha'i assembly or something, and not have any personal hatred towards them, and continue to love them, but for the protection of society or even for their own protection, you need to do this, and understand that is the way. And we love everybody, but loving everybody means that maybe they have to suffer some kind of punishment, which is still good for them. It's still a form of mercy and love to them as well. Any other comments on forgiveness? Let's go back to forgiveness. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned criticism earlier.
Yes.
I have learned something about that you have to look upon a person who gives you criticism as one as give you 100 roses.
Oh, that's very good. Yes, I like that very much, because she said that she was taught, she learned that if someone gives you criticism, they are giving you 100 roses. That's really nice. Do you like that? Because how many of you feel good when someone criticizes you? You don't like it, right? But what she's saying is that consider that something good. And this helps you to refrain from responding in kind. If someone criticizes you, you feel like criticizing them back. But if they gave you 100 roses, you probably wouldn't criticize them, would you? You would thank them.
You had the chance to change.
Yes, yes, yes. Did I tell the story about Abdul-Baha when he was taken to court? Did I tell that story here? You know, it's interesting because Abdul-Baha was grateful and thankful to everybody. And it so happens that a whole bunch of covenant breakers accused Abdul-Baha of building an arsenal of weapons where he was building the Shrine of the Bab, you know, the thing, and amassing an army and explosives to overthrow the government. And they went and they accused him of this, and he went to court. And Abdul-Baha stood up in court and he said, I would like to thank my accusers. He said, I'd like to thank them to have such confidence in me and my ability. To imagine that I, a prisoner with no money and no wealth, would have the power to amass weapons and build an army shows great confidence in me and my ability, and I'd like to thank them very much. And so he thanked them. And, you know, he won the court case. But he didn't yell at them or accuse them or say anything bad about them. He even thanked them for this. And so, in a way, maybe we can find, you know, things to do that no matter what they do. But that's a very nice way of viewing criticism, that we should never do that. Of course, we should never criticize other people thinking that we're giving them 100 roses. Okay, it's just something that we take on ourselves. Yes, go ahead.
Just a second so that everyone can hear.
I'm probably the only one they can hear. You talked about the pain that develops and stays with you over 17 years, and that it's really difficult to forgive. What about, if you turn that around, is it all right to go to someone and ask forgiveness, and without explaining what is to be forgiven? Because you mentioned that you could act in a forgiving way, but not necessarily dwell on what there was to be forgiven for. So if you turn that around, is that all right?
Now, are you saying that somebody else needs to forgive you?
Yes.
Like you did the bad thing?
I did the bad thing.
You did the bad thing. Can you go to the person and say, will you forgive me?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good question. I haven't had that. I think that that's okay, provided you do all the other 12 signs of love towards that person. Okay, I think that would be okay. I don't think that would hurt. I'm just thinking about it. The point is that you don't want to demand forgiveness. I remember one time Shoghi Effendi said about God, he says, he said, we can hope for God's forgiveness, but we can't impose upon it, I think was the exact term he used. So you don't impose upon God to forgive you, but you can certainly hope for it and pray for it. So if you can pray to God and say, God, please forgive me, which we do, I think you can do that as well. But not if you just impose upon other people that they must forgive you, like forgive me, like you can't do it in that way. You have to then do the other signs of love. In other words, love is something that must be expressed in all its forms. And so I think it would be okay as long as you do the others. That would be my answer. If someone has any other comments, please let me know. Back in the back there.
I had a question. It is, how can we forgive our mistakes, which is caused by our choices?
How can we forgive our mistakes, which is caused by our choices? Okay. Is that what you said? Okay. In other words, what you're saying is that you did some choices in the past, and that has led to the condition you're in the world now. In whatever life. In other words, you're blaming the situation of your life right now on yourself. Is that what you're basically saying? And you're saying, how can you forgive that? Exactly the same way you forgive other people. You have to let go of it. You have to wash it from the top of your heart and begin today afresh and anew. Because surely you have done some wrong things that have hurt you, but it's the same with everybody else. They've done wrong things too. So why would it be any different to yourself or anything else? If you hang on to it, then you're not going to improve. And, you know, everything is for your own good. Even the bad things that you have done. Don't think that just my life is bad and it's not God's fault. It's my fault. Did anyone feel that way? Anyone feel that bad things in their life is their own fault? Well, somebody does. I know people do. Some people think that everything wrong with my life is my husband's fault. Some people think everything that's wrong with my life is my wife's fault. Some people think everything wrong with my life is my parents' fault, my boss's fault. There's always somebody's fault, and some people think everything's wrong is my fault. In all cases, it doesn't make any sense. Because right here and now, the future begins. And you just have to become better today than you were yesterday. So I think the way in which you forgive yourself is the same way you forgive other people. You wash it away from the tablet of your heart. So what? I did a horrible thing. I killed 50 people. Whatever I did. Whatever it is, what can you do? You can't change the past. But what you can do is say, I am going today to erase that from my heart. I'm going to love myself, not in a selfish or pride way, but I'm going to love the good qualities that are in me. And the easiest way to do that is to start practicing love. The easiest way to forgive yourself, to let go, is to start loving other people. And as you love other people, you'll find God dwells within you, and you'll then be happy, and you'll have a good self-image, because you realize, oh, I can be a loving person. But if you hate yourself, if you have some kind of self-hating, self-loathing, or something, then it's not going to lead to anything. So you need to forgive yourself in the same way that you forgive other people. I don't think it's any different. Does that help at all? Is that what you're asking about? Okay, good. Who's got another question? Or comment, too. Yes, go ahead.
What about the passages in the writings that say, turn away from the ungodly?
Oh, it doesn't. The writings don't say turn away from the ungodly. No, the writings say eschew fellowship with the ungodly. That's in the second Persian hidden word, isn't that right? It says eschew fellowship with the ungodly. Or in the Kitab-i-Khan, to avoid boastful and worldly people, I think. Is that right? So there are certain passages of the writings that say that you should not do something. But then there are 100 other passages that say we should love everyone, even our enemies, to be kind to all people. So I think this comes from my understanding of the word fellowship. Fellowship in the writings means that you not only associate with people, but it means that you actually join them. That's what fellowship means. You join them and become a party with them and do the things they do. Okay, that's fellowship. And that's what we should not do. So we love people, we forgive people, but we don't become like them and do all the things they do. That is too much love. Okay, so if, for example, someone comes up to you and says, you know, you love me, don't you? And you want me to be happy. And you say, yes, I love you. Okay, I want you to come out with me and let's drink and let's have, you know, sex and let's murder and all that. You say, no, that's not the kind of love I have for you. That's fellowship with you, and I'm going to avoid that, but I'm still going to love you. The trick is to still show love towards people that are doing things that you don't want to do. The people you're not going to have fellowship, you're going to still love them. Because Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they do not have the ability to show love towards people that don't follow their teachings. In other words, if you don't obey my teachings, I'm not going to love you. Baha'u'llah said we can't do that. He said we never despise even the sinner. Whatever they do, we still love them. We still have love for them, but we don't become like them. And that's what I think the second Persian hidden word means. That's my understanding of fellowship. Yes, in the back there. Can you get the microphone? Because it's really, I can't hear. Here it's coming. And then while he's... Okay, go ahead.
In the Bible, it says love your enemies.
Yes. Yes, love your enemies. While I'm speaking, some people raise your hand and you run around to the other people. Yes, you have to love your enemies. It's in the Bible. Abdul-Baha said, all love must be loving, even your enemies. How many of you love your enemies? Okay, well that's a good point. If you don't have any enemies, you can't love them. But there are some people that will make you their enemy. Because they will oppose you in some way. They will criticize you, they'll attack you, they'll lie about you, and so on. So the point is that you have to love the people that even do bad things to you. Yes?
What I remember to have read is that Soviet family has this text that he has written that unlovely means the covenant breaker.
Oh, it could be that too. I've never read that, but that... yeah, I've never read that. But that makes perfect sense, because we actually should not have any association with the covenant breaker. That's true. Some people might say, well, hold on, is the law of not associating with covenant breakers, is that breaking Abdul-Baha's teachings? Because the teachings cannot contradict each other. We know they don't contradict. But this is a special condition, and to do that, to withhold association with them, is an act of love, because it enables us to maintain unity, and unity is the highest of the principles of love, maintaining unity. So these are very complicated things, and that would be a great way to interpret it. I'm going to look up and see if I can find that as a reference, because it's a great way to interpret that hidden word. Who's next?
Thank you. Is it possible to feel aggression and at the same time be forgiving?
Is it possible to feel aggression and at the same time be forgiven? Are you talking about being forgiven by God?
Forgiving to people who do something bad to you.
Oh, yes. So you can forgive them, but you still feel something. Okay, you're not completely washing it away from the tablet of your heart. I read the passage. Baha'u'llah said, forgive and then wash it away. So what you're saying is you want to hang on to a little bit of this thing. You want to forgive and not forgive. 2 feet, you know, one in the forgive. So I'd say it's possible that that could be your first step. In other words, they say, I want to forgive Korosh. I'm sorry to keep pointing you, but you're right there. I want to forgive Korosh. Well, maybe it's going to be hard, because maybe he did something really bad to me. But if I start practicing the signs of love, I listen to him, I praise him, and so on, then maybe that will help me to get the other foot over there. But ultimately, you have to wash it from the tablet of your heart. Ultimately, you have to do that, because if you keep it in your heart, sooner or later it's going to come out again, and you're not going to forgive him. So I think it's possible, as long as you're trying to get away from it, but don't hang on to it for too long. That would be my thing. I think, do we have any more time, or are we out of time? What time is it now? 2 more minutes. Oh, then one more person. One more person, last person. You pick.
Hi. This might be a little bit off topic.
Oh.
I apologize for this, but I thought about what you said about Judaism and Christianity not really having the concept of forgiving or loving your enemies. And I struggle with this a lot, because we recognize our religions. And why do you think that we have this and the other religions don't have it? Is it because they at the time weren't ready, and now we're ready for this kind of insight, or what's your thought?
Oh, no, I want to distinguish between the other religions and the followers of other religions. Let me make this very clear. Christianity, we've been reading quotations from the Bible all day today, and it believes in loving your enemies and forgiveness and so on. But religions fall into the pattern of judgmentalism. Judgmentalism is the fact that we judge other people by whether or not they fulfill certain standards or conditions that we hold, and then we think that someone that does do that, then they're good, and those that don't do that don't do bad. Judgmentalism is prohibited by Baha'u'llah. He says we should not despise the sinner and never consider his low estate. And he says there's many reasons why we don't do that. First of all, he says we don't know what our own end shall be. We don't know he says, how often has a sinner at the hour of death ascended, and someone faithful has fallen. So we don't know what our own end shall be. Secondly, he says we should never consider someone whether they're good or bad, because God only judges people by how much they fulfill in relation to their capacity. So that somebody has a very great capacity, And he may only be fulfilling a little bit, and somebody else might have a very small capacity and he's fulfilling a very large amount of it. And so I might look at that person and say he's very great, but maybe his capacity is huge and he's not doing it. I look at another person and I don't think he's very great at all, but he may be fulfilling more of his capacity. And Baha'u'llah says that's the only thing. And since we don't know the capacity of everyone, we don't judge anyone. But what happens is the followers of religion start to think that everybody that believes in their religion is good. And everybody that doesn't believe in their religion is bad. And then they start judging people. And then it gets even worse. They try to impose upon other people their religious teachings. Okay? So it might be their religious teachings that you don't be homosexual. And so then they say, well, if you're homosexual, you're a sinner, you're despised, I hate you, and they fight you. But if you're not a Christian, you shouldn't care. And we Baha'is do not mind if someone is anything, a homosexual or anything else, if they don't want to do it. Because Baha'u'llah himself said, he says, whosoever desireth, let him turn aside from this counsel. Whosoever desireth, let him choose the path to his Lord. So if even Baha'u'llah doesn't care whether or not someone chooses it or not, how can we blame somebody? So we love all peoples. Even if they're alcoholics or this or that or this, or they do whatever, we love them all. And we never try to say to someone, if you're not obeying the Baha'i teachings, I don't love you. Because they're not Baha'is. I go every day to work with people that don't fast for 19 days. You know, they don't practice the fast 19 days of the year because they're not Baha'is. I don't hate them. I don't say, oh, you're a disgusting, horrible, stinky, rotten person because you don't fast. Because they didn't choose to do that. And it's the same way. That's what I mean by judgmental. That we do not judge someone because they follow our teachings. Our teachings are for us. And this is the essential teaching of all religions. It doesn't distinguish us from all the religions. But what happens is that religions fall into the habit of judgmentalism, and then the manifestation comes back and says, hey, you guys, you know, get it right. Don't stop judging people. You know, love everybody, no matter what they are. The sun shines on the whole world. It doesn't just shine on the Christians or the Jews. It shines on the entire world. That's what I meant by that passage. Okay. So, yes?
I was thinking, because I was reading about the Middle East and what's happening there now, and my mom made a comment that maybe because they have teachings like tooth for a tooth, that's kind of influencing their behavior now. And like, I'm like, was that right for the time, or is it something? Is it a construct that somebody made up, or what? Like, what's the meaning of tooth for a tooth? Like?
Yes, and in fact, that's correct. Your mother is correct. That religion is renewed in each age for a very good reason, and that's because society changes, and certain laws that were applicable at one stage are no longer appropriate. So the law, tooth for a tooth, was a Judaic law, and Jesus annulled it. He said in the past it was that, and now it's turned the other cheek. And so the manifestation of God has to do that. And so it means that we have to understand that the age changes, and when the age changes, the needs change, and the manifestation of God returns. And Baha'u'llah said, be anxiously concerned with the needs of your age. So it so happens that Christianity and Islam, they fulfilled the needs of the past, but the solution to our problems comes with God's newest revelation. And so your mother is exactly right. It's a very difficult thing, and the only way that we're going to resolve these problems is through the teachings of God in this day and age. That's a completely different subject, and you're right. But I forgive you, okay? I forgive you. And I hope that we can discuss all things, but I don't want to lose the fact that every one of you promised that you were going to try and forgive. And to do this, because I want to keep our focus on forgiveness. I want to keep it on it and see if we can practice this essential quality of love. And are we finished for today? So how many have we done so far? 6. We're halfway through already. That's great. And we have, what days do we have? We have We have plenty of time. So we're going to get through all 12, and then we're going to maybe talk about how we can go home and practice all these. You're doing a great job, and really very interesting consultation here. I'm glad we had the time to do that. And I'll see if we can make time in the future, since we're ahead, to have this kind of discussion. Thank you all very much.
Be content with showing friendship in words alone. Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn, let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn, let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn, let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path.